Hello everyone, good morning and welcome to this live webinar hosted by TPC Vision. Today's topic is A New Normal, Returning to Work, Workplace Considerations. Our team is very happy to host you today to talk about this pressing topic as part of our COVID-19 Employment Webinar Series. My name is Angelique O'Bryan. Stephanie Cumley, Kayla Thomas, and I are your TPC Vision team. We provide HR solutions to clients with employee headcounts ranging from 4 employees to over 400 employees. Combined, we have about 50 years of experience in human resources and have worked in or with a variety of different industries, such as manufacturing, banking, medical and dental clinics, construction, technology, marketing, restaurants, pharmaceuticals, transportation, property management, and early education. All 3 members of the team have earned degrees of higher education and are HRCI or SHRM certified. As HR professionals, our goal is to provide strategic support to help our clients meet business objectives while providing innovative solutions to help you stay ahead of the competition. Together, we focus on keeping our clients HR compliant with ever-changing employment laws, on exploring the link between company culture and organizational effectiveness, and on using technology to streamline processes. You'll hear from all 3 members of the team today. A quick legal disclaimer. This communication and any accompanying documents are intended for educational and informational purposes only, do not constitute legal information, and should not be relied on as such. While we hope that you'll learn a lot today, we are not attorneys, and the information should not be construed as legal advice. If you are seeking legal advice, you are encouraged to consult an attorney. The purpose of today's webinar is to discuss the new normal we are experiencing in the workplace, including the transition back to on-site work, online recruiting and hiring, new employee benefits and health and safety concerns, to learn how to effectively recall employees back to work after a furlough or layoff, and to understand how to update company policies, create business continuity plans, and prepare for future pandemics, emergencies, and disasters. All right, so let's dive right in. What is the new normal? What does that even mean? And so, this is a term that's been thrown around a lot lately to refer to kind of the concept that what was our normal will not be our normal in the future. We do have a goal of kind of getting things to a stable point so that we can resume business, that kind of thing, but it's not necessarily a goal of getting things back to the way they used to be. It's more about figuring out how things are going to be now and moving forward. So what is the new normal? We're not simply talking about resumption of normal business activities like I talked about, following furloughs, layoffs, telework arrangements, which were made as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. There are other things that you as an HR person or a business manager or owner have to consider. What are the health and safety concerns within your workplace or within your local community? Are you under any kind of restrictions that you need to be aware of, or even if you're not under actual restrictions, are there safety concerns that you individually or as a business owner need to be cognizant of? How do you implement social distancing and effective public safety measures for your business? What's your liability and your responsibility to provide a safe workplace? Maybe your employees will now have the perception that they could telework indefinitely. How do you manage that perception? How do you maintain business effectiveness if you do opt for a long-term remote work arrangement? What are your legal responsibilities as the employer through all of this? Are you up to date on everything you need to do with regard to legal postings, employee notices, etc.? And for a lot of you, most pressing, how do you get your employees to return to work while they're juggling so many other responsibilities that have come out of the COVID-19 health crisis? There's a lot to unpack here. The TPC Vision is here to help. There are a lot of new federal and state requirements to be aware of. When it comes to required postings and notices, for example, All employers must post the Families First Coronavirus Response Act poster in a visible place. There's also an OSHA poster that educates employees on reducing exposure. And at the state law level, for example, Arkansas has a required notice that must be posted at your main entrance, and also a notice that must be provided to every employee whose employment is terminated, informing them of their rights to file for unemployment. And other states may or may not have similar requirements as well. When it comes to reviewing and revising hiring practices and policies, there are a lot of things you'll want to consider. Have your staffing needs changed? Do you need to change benefits or pay to become more competitive? Use remote interviewing techniques as much as possible to reduce exposure. Update your onboarding practices to be no or low touch. We'll talk about those topics in a little bit. And as you review and revise your leave policies, think about how the FFCRA affects your previous policies and practices. Consider implementing PTO and vacation rollovers, for example, or grace periods, and revise the guidelines for usage if vacation is forfeited if not used by year end. Consider implementing or revising your bereavement leave policies, especially when related to COVID. And try to ensure that all employees have access to and a full understanding of all the leave policies that apply to them. So have them sign off on those policies, give them an opportunity to ask questions. Review and revise your work from home policies, your childcare policies. Consider updating your work travel policies if necessary, if that's applicable, especially taking into consideration any new orders in your state. Any new practices being implemented in your workplace to keep employees and customers safe. Review your rehire and reinstate provisions as well as they relate to your benefits policies. Review your eligibility and waiting periods on your benefits policies and consider how those will impact your employees who are returning or being rehired. Consult your benefits provider for guidance on offering benefits to any employee that has elected COBRA, and review health benefits and company retirement plans to determine any modifications that are needed there due to a break in service related to COVID. Furloughs and layoffs. We'll just dive in. When we're calling employees or rehiring employees, first thing we want to think about are the legal considerations. If you're recalling only some workers that were laid off or furloughed, ensure your practices for determining who to recall do not discriminate against any group of employees. If you employ union workers, you'll also want to review the rehire language presented in your collective bargaining agreement. And then also just consider what legal considerations apply specifically to your industry or your geography. Next, you'll want to plan and prepare for their return to work. So determine the date for recalling furloughed employees or for rehiring employees that were laid off. Issue a letter of intent to each employee offering a return to work. Determine if the recalled or rehired employee will return to the same position. And determine if your prior paid sick leave accruals must be reinstated by law. Last, what administrative burdens exist for your HR team as employees return to work? So you'll want to review your state and local laws to determine if a new direct deposit form must be created, if your recalled or rehired employees should be drug tested. You'll want to provide an employee handbook, including all of the new or revised policies, and get a signature on that, and also any other new hire forms that the employee needs to review or acknowledge. Look at your paid family leave contributions. Those must be resumed, and then provide a new W-4 for the employee to complete. That's going to be consistent for all of you, and then determine if the employee needs an updated or new Form I-9 as well. And now I'm going to hand it off to Kayla Thomas from the TPC Vision team to talk about transitioning teleworkers back to the office. Kayla?
Thank you so much, Angelique. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kayla Thomas, and now we're going to talk about the telework transition back into the office. So I'm assuming a lot of you probably had employees that were working remotely or working from home during this pandemic. And some of those situations may have been temporary teleworking arrangements. Some of them may have been permanent, and some of them may have transitions from temporary into a permanent arrangement. So now let's just take a look at some of the HR topics that you'll want to, consider whenever you transition back into the office. So first, let's talk about recruiting. During COVID-19, you were probably doing virtual interviews or maybe, virtual conversations with applicants. You may have had a hiring freeze, and you might have been utilizing certain electronic features such as electronic offer letters or electronic employment agreements. And so after COVID-19, whenever you transition back into the office, you may still want to conduct those virtual interviews, especially whenever you do the first pre-screening interview. But you will likely have your hiring revamped. It may not be right off the back, but hopefully in the next few months your hiring will pick back up. You could also continue to do those electronic options like we talked about, offer letters and agreements. Moving on to onboarding. You may have been utilizing the temporary I-9 virtual verification process. That process has been extended for a little bit. You may be using electronic onboarding through iSolved. And you may have done a virtual welcome and greeting to those new employees in your organization. As you transition into the office, you'll want to make sure that you return to the regular I-9 verification process. Of course, you can continue to utilize electronic onboarding through iSolved. And I would recommend doing an in-person welcome or greeting for all of your new employees that actually come into your office physically rather than a virtual welcome. Now let's talk about orientation. During COVID, you were probably doing a virtual introduction with those team members. You may have been doing on-the-job training, virtual equipment setup, things like that virtually. And after COVID, you're going to want to make sure that you do a virtual or in-person intro, and you could do a virtual or in-person training as well. It's completely up to you and kind of what fits your guys' culture and your organization best. I would recommend to do an in-person equipment setup for new employees, but if you have the capabilities, you could certainly do that virtually as well. Training and development. So you were likely either pausing your training and development efforts, or you were having employees switch to online learning methods. We saw with schools, a lot of schools transitioned into the online or virtual learning platforms. You may have been doing virtual lessons and trainings as well as virtual development courses. Now, all of these topics that we just talked about are certainly permissible after COVID-19. So you can continue to do those online courses. You could do virtual or in-person training as well as learning and development. Moving on to performance. You likely suspended your performance reviews during the COVID-19 pandemic. You may have tried to revamp or reiterate your expectations, and you likely were providing virtual feedback as opposed to in-person feedback. After COVID, you'll want to make sure that you reset those expectations and your review schedules and get those back on track for your employees, as well as continue to give that virtual and in-person feedback to all of your employees. Compensation. You may have experienced, unfortunately, salary reductions, furloughs or layoffs, an increase and a bonus freeze as well during COVID. Hopefully, with some of the loans that are available out there to organizations, your organization wasn't affected financially too much. But after you return to the office, you're going to want to make sure that you take a look at your compensation plan and maybe revamp that. Probably, if you did have furloughs or layoffs, you may have to look at maybe reduced work schedules or hours. And hopefully, the bonus freeze or the increased freeze won't last too long. Hopefully, you'll be able to resume those normal compensation plans as usual. Let's take a look at a few remote workplace considerations. So first, should employers consider making some of the temporary remote situations permanent? Yeah, we talked about that a little bit earlier. If it fits your organizations, I think you could certainly do that. Do we have to allow an employee to continue to work from home after we have reopened? Certainly you do not have to, but there are certain considerations that you'll want to keep in mind on a case-by-case basis if you choose to do so. Are employers required to cover any additional costs that employees may incur if they work from home? This is a tricky one. It likely depends on your specific organization and what type of agreements you have with your employees. But certainly if you are able to help them with those additional costs such as Wi-Fi or if they have to get their own technology, certainly try to reimburse them for those work expenses. If an employer wants to gradually bring remote employees back to the office, could they bring back the employees who had a lower level of remote productivity first, or could that be seen to be discriminatory? It definitely could. I would not recommend basing it solely on the lower level of productivity, but certainly as long as you are treating those employees similar across the board and you're not being discriminatory by any discriminatory factors, then certainly I think you could do that. I would recommend, typically bringing back a department at a time or a group of employees at a time, or maybe like just your managers or just your employees if you are trying to do a slow return to the office phase in. Now we're going to take a look at some of the recruiting and hiring methods. I'm going to go through some interviewing tips that have to do with digital interviewing, because this is probably going to become more of a known and widespread thing that organizations are going to utilize even after the pandemic is over with. So first tip number one, you're going to want to think outside of the office. Okay, so when operating under social distancing, isolation, or quarantine measures, old school on-site interview procedures just won't cut it. Ask yourself what you could do differently that is unique to your company's structure and culture. How can you get what you need out of the interviewing process without in-person contact? Now is the time to innovate. You're going to want to keep in mind that just because, the stay-at-home orders have been lifted and you do not have to necessarily isolate yourself anymore, it may save you time to do digital or virtual interviewing, so you're going to want to keep some of this in mind if you guys decide to utilize the iSelf-Hire feature called WEDGE, which is the interviewing online virtual interviewing platform that we offer. Digital interviewing tip number 2, be an open book. We're living in a new world, and so are your job candidates. Help them get to know your company. By publishing or otherwise making available lots of compelling information about your company, like benefits info, positive turnover rates, workplace culture info, and employee testimonials, as well as your proactive COVID-19 response, you can put candidates at ease and help them get excited about working for you and your organization. Digital interviewing tip number 3. Consistency is king. Automated digital interviews are a fantastic tool to help you get ahead of your recruiting goals. By crafting and sticking with processes and question sets that dig into the competency and experience requirements of the role, you can drive a fair, consistent, and effective hiring process. Digital interviewing tip number 4. Take action intentionally. Though many Americans are currently experiencing or will soon be facing unemployment, many employers who are less affected are using the opportunity to fill open roles or may even need to further staff up to meet new demands. By moving with the intention toward the goal of hiring the right people, you can avoid losing a good candidate to a direct competitor. Digital interviewing tip number 5. Utilize your resources. Take advantage of every resource you have available to you to make your life easier. An automatic interviewing platform called WEDGE is free to TPC Vision clients for 90 days, seamlessly integrates with your iSelf-Hire account, and allows for hands-off interviews. If you guys haven't taken advantage of this free trial from WEDGE, let us know and we'll get you guys hooked up. A little bit more about WEDGE. So driving efficiency in your hiring practices is easy. By integrating WEDGE into iSelf-Hire, you can invite applicants to record video interviews at their convenience and can review them at yours. We've had quite a few clients utilize this particular platform, and a lot of them are continuing to utilize it even after we go back to the office and you can conduct regular in-person interviews. We've got a lot of clients using the WEDGE integration to screen out candidates in that first phase of interviews. So a lot of them are having them do the WEDGE interview as a first step, and then they'll source down their candidates from that particular interview and then bring in, particular candidates that they would like to have for a second interview and for an in-person interview. So it can be utilized in a lot of different ways. Now let's take a look at virtual new hire paperwork and orientations. We talked a little bit about new hire orientation at the beginning, but here are just a few tips to improve your new hire orientation. First, schedule an intro phone call. Make sure that you schedule an introduction call to kickstart the orientation process. Welcome the employee, explain the onboarding process and the timeline. Let the employee know that you are available for them throughout the employee orientation process. Provide clear and concise instructions. And let the new employee know that you will be regularly following up with them throughout the orientation and onboarding processes. Use video to connect. I'm sure everyone is super familiar with Zoom nowadays, but attempt to use video chat when possible to replace that in-person conversation that you would usually have. Share your contact information for FaceTime, Zoom, or send a GoToMeeting invitation. After your first video chat conversation, provide them with an email reiterating the welcome to convey any additional resources that they have available to them and where they may find them. Typically, the interviewing process will be done through video interviewing, whether that is live video interviewing or a recorded video interview such as WEDGE. Make sure that you send a welcome email. Send a warm welcome to the employee and let them know how excited you are for them to join the team. A short message can go a long way. Make sure that you share a link or a short message regarding the company's mission, history, and vision so that they feel more connected to your culture and your organization. Provide them with valuable information such as emails, maybe an organizational chart, communication tools, and so on and so forth. Try to be creative and go beyond the new employee's expectations to unlock those unlimited possibilities. A few new hire orientation best practices include: prepare a team greeting. You could set up a video conference to introduce the new team member and encourage the team to schedule individual meetings that week with your new employee. A lot of people, again, were working at home, so a new video or a weekly Zoom call would be really great to help your employee welcome them into the organization. Have the new employee complete the electronic onboarding process. Make sure that you are available to answer any questions regarding the employee handbook. Get the new employee's equipment ready to use. If your company supplied the equipment, such as the laptop, have all the applications ready and downloaded and ready to go for them to use. And then make sure you figure out a way to get the equipment to the employee safely. Complete mock orientations within your organization or your HR department. Maybe test the waters for your first round of virtual orientation or virtual interviews with the existing employees and ask for constructive feedback to improve your processes. Try to schedule one-on-one meetings. Try to do this with the HR department, the department lead, and the manager so that the employee gets familiar with who he or she needs to report to and check in with on a daily basis. Make sure that you conduct on-the-job virtual training, if applicable. Even if the new employee is unable to come into the main office or report to work in person, have the manager complete virtual on-the-job training with the new employee to get him or her acclimated to the new position. As we discussed earlier, there has been an I-9 virtual verification update. There are some temporary I-9 provisions that started on March 20th, which allowed employers to not have to physically review the employee's identity and employment authorization documents in the employee's physical presence. So once business is resumed as normal, all employees who were onboarded using the virtual verification must report to their employer within 3 business days for an in-person verification of identity and employment eligibility documentation for the I-9 form eligibility verification. This provision, keep in mind, only applies to employers or specific roles which are operating remotely. Once this has been done, once the documents have been physically inspected, the employer should add the documents physically examined verbiage within the date of inspection to Section 2 of the additional information form on the I-9. This is just a screenshot of what the additional information section may look like whenever you go in to actually physically examine those documents. Again, you'll want to make sure you put the date and then the explanation that the documents were digitally examined on the date of hire. If you're using iSolve to do your I-9s electronically, simply complete it in the system and then print and then note and scan and save the document into Employee Documents. Now I'm going to pass it off to Stephanie Cumley, another member of our TPC Vision team, to talk about employee benefits.
Thank you, Kayla. Yes, we are going to talk about some of the earlier legislation related to benefits, and we will also cover some recent rules issued by the Employee Benefits Security Administration because of the challenges that individuals are facing due to the pandemic. As you may recall in previous legislation, all testing for the coronavirus is to be covered by private insurance plans with no cost sharing. In addition, high deductible health plans paired with a health savings account must cover the cost of telehealth services related to COVID-19. This means that patients will not have to pay a deductible for these services. The legislation also allows for over-the-counter medical products to be considered qualified expenses on health savings and flexible spending accounts. The legislation also amended ERISA to allow employers the ability to postpone certain ERISA filing deadlines for a period of up to 1 year and granted single employer pension plan companies more time to meet their funding obligations by delaying the due date for contributions. We also saw some relief for retirement plan participants when the government increased the maximum amount allowed for distributions to the lesser of the participants' vested balance, or $100,000. So now let's take a look at some of the more recent changes related to cafeteria plans. Before I go over the information on this slide, however, I wanted to mention that these changes are only applicable if an employer chooses to amend their plan. If you do not want to amend your plan, you do not have to. For your employer-sponsored health coverage, you can allow an employee to make a new election even if the employee initially declined coverage. You can also allow employees to revoke an existing election and enroll in different health coverage offered by the employer, or they may revoke an existing election if the employee is or will be enrolled in other health coverage. For health flexible spending accounts and dependent care FSAs, you can amend your plan document to allow an employee to revoke an election, make a new election, or decrease or increase an existing election. They're also encouraging employers to allow more flexibility regarding grace periods and any unused funds. Again, this is only applicable if the employer chooses to amend their plan. If you're interested in doing this, please note that you must amend your plan by December 31st, 2021. All right, so let's talk about some of the changes to COBRA. The DOL has issued a new model general notice and a new election notice. The goal is to help individuals better understand the interactions between Medicare and COBRA. You can find these new model notices on the DOL website at the website address listed on the slide. Keep in mind that you will want to replace your current notices with the new ones, or if you are using a third-party administrator, visit with them about the notices. You will also need to send out communications about the deadline extensions that we're going to cover in the next slide. So what are the new deadline extensions? Well, you're going to hear me mention national emergency and outbreak period several times as we talk about the deadline extensions. Essentially, the outbreak period begins on March 1st, 2020 and ends 60 days after the national COVID-19 emergency has been declared as over, which of course is unknown at this time. With regard to special enrollment periods for qualifying events, submission of claims, appeals, adverse determinations, requests for external reviews, and various COBRA, FSA, and HRA deadlines, the days included in the outbreak period will not count toward these deadline periods. For COBRA, this includes the 60-day continuation coverage election period, 45-day retroactive time frame for making your first payment, the 30-day grace period to make a monthly payment, and to notify the plan of a second COBRA qualifying event or a determination of disability. For the medical FSA and HRA, it includes the 90-day run-out period to submit and get reimbursed for claims incurred during the previous plan year. I wanted to mention a few things regarding these deadline extensions. All right, to explain how the outbreak period interacts with the COBRA election period, we've created a visual for you. You'll notice in the middle of the screen there's a time period disregarded section in red, and basically that is considered the outbreak period. This time frame is not counted against the number of days that an employee has to make their COBRA election. So in this example, the employee terminated on January 17th, which is our qualifying event date. Because the employer's coverage goes to the end of the month in which an employee terms, their actual loss of coverage is on January 31st. The employer mailed out the election notice on February 6th. You'll notice from February 6th to March 1st, when the outbreak period starts, there's been 23 days in that time period. You'll count these 23 days and then stop until the outbreak period ends on July 31st. Because we don't know when the national emergency will end, we're assuming that the government declares that to be over on May 31st, and then we've got to count another 60 days beyond that in order for the outbreak period to end. So as you can see here, we won't start counting days again until the outbreak period ends, and then we need to go another 37 days in order to get us up to a total of 60 days. So at that point, the election period ends and the employee is no longer able to make the COBRA election. If they were to make the election, which you can see in this example, they did make their election on May 1st. However, we can't count the time up to the point where the outbreak period ends. So they then have 45 days beyond the end of the outbreak period to make their first payment, and that would take them through September 13th. Okay, so let's take a look at another example. In this situation, the employee terminated on April 21st. They had coverage through April 30th. And because the employer knew of the termination date, they went ahead and sent out the election notice on April 25th. As you can see, all of these dates fall within the time period that's disregarded as part of the outbreak period. So we cannot start counting the number of days that they have to make their election until the end of the outbreak period, which ends on July 30th. So the former employee has from July 30th through September 28th to actually make their COBRA election. As you can see in this example, the employee actually did make their COBRA election on May 1st. However, we're not able to start the time period of 45 days that they need to make their premium payment. So we start that on counting those days as well on July 30th. So basically they have from July 30th to September 13th to make their first premium payment. And that first premium payment would be for the months of May, June, July, and August. And again, they would need to make that by September 13th. Now we're going to talk about the flexible spending account runout period. Most plans have a plan year end date of December 31st with a plan year start date of January 1st. And although it can vary from plan to plan, many plans have a 90-day runout period. In this example, we would start counting the number of days for the runout period on January 1st. But because the outbreak period starts on March 1st, we have to stop counting those days as of that date. So as of March 1st, we've only hit 60 days. Once the outbreak period ends, which is anticipated in this example to be July 30th, we would then start counting again toward that 90-day period. So as you can see here in this example, the 90-day period actually starts on January 1st and ends on August 29th because we're disregarding the time period for the outbreak period. I just wanted to reiterate that we do not know when the national emergency will be considered over, and therefore we don't know when the outbreak period will end. The sample dates we included were just to illustrate how it might possibly work. All right, so we talked a little bit about some of the benefit changes, and now we want to turn our focus to health and safety concerns. So OSHA has categorized employees in 4 different categories: very high risk, medium risk, and lower risk. As you can see, employees in very high risk might be healthcare workers performing aerosol generating procedures, healthcare and laboratory personnel collecting or handling specimens, or morgue workers performing autopsies. High risk might be healthcare delivery and support staff, medical transport workers, and mortuary workers. Medium risk could be those who have frequent or close contact with people who may be infected but are not known or suspected patients. Those in areas with ongoing community transmission, with contact with the general public, or those in areas without ongoing community transmission that have frequent contact with travelers who may return from international locations with widespread transmission. And then the lower risk category, those employees do not require contact with people known to be or suspected of being infected, or do not have frequent close contact with the general public or coworkers. These categories are important because OSHA has delivered some guidelines for how to treat these different types of employees. For more information, you can go to the website link that is at the end of the slide. Next, we're going to look at workplace controls. I know many employers have been looking for ways to minimize exposure to the virus for its employees and customers. There's several different ways to do this. Obviously, having an employee work from home is one of the optimal ways to remove them from any instances where they would be exposed to the virus. Some other ways to do that would be engineering controls. Now, some of these might be costly, so you'll just have to look and see what's best for your organization or what's financially feasible. But you could install high-efficiency air filters, increase ventilation rates in the work environment, install physical barriers such as clear plastic sneeze guards, which we're seeing a lot of employers do, install a drive-through window for customer service, install specialized negative pressure ventilation in some settings, install automatic doors, motion sensor lighting, voice-activated elevator and intercom buttons, and no-touch disposal receptacles. Some employers are also implementing body temperature scanning devices. Another way, of course, is to provide your employees with personal protective equipment. If you do this, you'll want to train them how to wear and use that equipment, and then also how to effectively and safely remove the clothing and equipment. Another type of control is considered administrative controls. You'll see in the checklist here, there are many different types of controls. These are covered in a return to work checklist that Angelique is going to go over at the end of the presentation. But these types of controls include educating your employees, making cleaning supplies and hand sanitizer available, cleaning common areas, screening for symptoms and possible exposure, encouraging employees to stay home or requiring certifications if possible, encouraging alternate ways to communicate rather than face-to-face communication, minimizing contact, replacing handshakes with head nods, waves, and verbal communication. Another way might be to implement smartphone apps for your timekeeping so that your employees aren't touching the same time clock all the time. It might be adding extra shifts or alternating work days, modifying business hours, workspace layouts, reducing seating and limiting capacity, marking hallways, stairways as one way, restricting non-essential travel, and of course we're creating a response plan for employees who demonstrate symptoms at work, or those who have tested positive, or maybe even those who have been in contact with someone who tested positive, whether that be at work or at home. Of course, putting in company policies and procedures is important, and developing emergency communication plans. That might include a forum for answering workers' concerns and internet-based communications, and of course displaying posters and restricting business travel to essential travel only. I also wanted to make you aware that the Centers for Disease Control has put together 6 different decision trees to help employers navigate how to reopen their business. As you can see, there's one for general workplaces, one for restaurants and bars, one's for mass transit, schools, childcare, and those running programs in youth camps. Keep in mind, this is from the CDC. They also recommend that you check with state and local health officials and other partners to determine the most appropriate action while adjusting to meet the unique needs and circumstances of the local community. So now we're going to shift our focus to business continuity and disaster recovery plans. I'm sure many of you had plans in place prior to the pandemic, but maybe you didn't have a lot of planning for for a situation like COVID-19. And so I know many of us are looking back and saying, okay, we need to look at our plans, see what's in place, and enhance them to cover situations like this. So again, many of you may have had a business continuity plan in place, or you're looking to revamp an existing plan because maybe that plan focused heavily on natural disasters or other types of events that could impact your business. So I know many of us are looking at how do we look at the pandemic a little bit differently. Well, one way to do is to, first of all, follow 4 steps to develop a business continuity plan. You're going to look at the business impact analysis and assess any potential impacts that could harm your business, such as a pandemic. Train your managers how to complete the questionnaire, create the analysis, conduct follow-up meetings with your managers, and then also, of course, review that with senior management. The next step is to develop recovery strategies. So how do we manage through this? You'll identify and document resource requirements, conduct gap analysis, and determine the plausible recovery strategies. And discuss those strategies with senior management and alter if necessary, and then you'll implement those strategies. The third step is to plan development. So you're going to develop your framework for the plan, establish and organize recovery teams, develop relocation plans in the event of a business disruption or disaster, create IT, business continuity procedures, and document with flexible and manual workarounds. Assemble the plan and review with senior management. Your 4th step would then be to test it out. So let's do some exercises, conduct training, and conduct orientation exercises. And then you're going to conduct that testing and document the results. And then you may need to update the plan to incorporate the lessons learned from the testing and exercises. You'll of course want to update those annually due to new processes, technology, or infrastructure. And I'm sure many of you are realizing that this business continuity plan needs to include infectious disease preparedness and response plan. And so there's different types of risk, of course, with these pandemics. So you want to take a look at where, how, and to what sources might workers be exposed. What are the non-occupational risk factors at home and in community settings? What are the workers' individual risk factors? And what are the controls necessary to control these risks? The next thing you may want to look at are what are some contingency plans we can put in place as an organization. So what happens if we have a lot of employees who are unable to come into the office or work from home? How do we conduct essential operations with that reduced workforce? Should we be cross-training our employees right now in the event something like this happens again? You might also be looking at how do we produce social distancing? Can we stagger our work shifts? How do we downsize operations? What's the most effective way to do that without impacting a lot of employees? How do we deliver our services remotely? And what are some other exposure reducing measures we can take? We also might want to take a look at what happens if our supply chain is interrupted or we experience delayed deliveries of our materials. Okay, so we've talked about benefits, we've talked about workplace controls, and then we've also talked about business continuity plans. I did want to mention a couple of other things that have come to the forefront recently. For those of you who have 100 or more employees, or if you're a federal contractor and you have more than 50 or more employees and more than $50,000 in federal contracts, you are not required to file the 2019 EEO-1 report this year. We do anticipate that you will be required in 2021 to file both the 2019 and the 2020 EEO-1 reports by the normal March deadline. If you are a federal contractor and you have an affirmative action plan, I also wanted to let you know that they have updated the voluntary self-identification of disability form. It's effective August 4th and valid until May 31st, 2023. Some of the changes include it's only 1 page instead of 2 pages, and there are some verbiage changes. They also expanded the list of disabilities to include some newly added impairments, as you'll see on the slide. All right, so I'm going to turn it back over to Angelique, and she's going to go over our return to work checklist.
All right, and so now that we've talked about all of these different aspects of your return to work plan, we just wanted to introduce really quickly the idea of the return to work checklist. So this is a really helpful tool as you kind of create your plan and then work through it. So we've talked about kind of all of these different aspects. We've talked about postings and policies, recalling your employees and planning toward that, health and safety, public interaction, social distancing. And so what we'll be providing for you on this next slide, you'll see a sample return to work checklist. And so this checklist is our gift to you for attending today's webinar. And this is kind of a starter checklist. And so it's going to cover what we talked about today. And then we would encourage you as you create your plan to edit this checklist to meet your needs so that as you work through all of the details of your plan, you've got this at your fingertips. And that can just be really helpful because there are a lot of moving parts in this type of plan. So we want to help you be prepared. Just a quick overview of the TPC Vision service model. We wanted to share with you a little bit about how the team can help you in this type of situation and across your HR function. This is just a quick timeline of the types and content of COVID-19 related content that the TPC Vision team has issued over the past 2 months. So as the crisis was unfolding in the U.S., we were constantly creating new content and rolling that out to our TPC Vision clients, and some of it publicly as well. You may have had access to that. And this is just kind of a small example of the types of work that our TPC Vision team can do for you. So it's related to compliance, to contingency planning, to decision making as you were figuring out kind of how to proceed with your business amid the pandemic. We were able to support our clients with a variety of policy templates, forms, agreements, checklists, guidance on the federal and state provisions that were coming out as they were coming out. We were constantly providing our clients with resources that were new, constantly coming on the internet for the best source of information for our clients, making sure that you have access to the posters that are being issued federally and at the state level, as well as kind of creating some of those posters when the posters were not created yet. There were several situations in which I know in Arkansas, the legislation had been passed, the language for the poster had been created, but the poster itself was in a delay, and so we went ahead and actually created that for our clients. We created several guides on how to proceed with certain major topics like telework, remote working, leave compliance, layoffs and terminations, anxiety management within the workplace, and then we've managed an FAQ on our website as well, which we've heard feedback from our clients has been really helpful. Sample email communications is a big one too. As you're dealing with all of that kind of managed chaos, as it were, just having the ability to kind of have content at your fingertips, I think has been really helpful for a lot of our clients. Of course, we've done several webinars, most of which have been recorded webinars provided to our clients or posted on our website. Lots of sample letters, again, to help with having that pre-formatted, pre-created content at your fingertips. The same for those guides and documents. And then, of course, our technology platforms. The iSolve payroll platform has had a lot of updates related to COVID. The iSolved Hire platform has integrated with WEDGE and has a lot of new integration and upgrades there as well. So there's been a lot going on with TPC and TPC Vision to better serve you through the pandemic. We just want to thank you for your time today. We know that your time is very valuable, especially right now, and we just want to thank you for joining us. For pricing regarding TPC Vision services, please reach out to your sales representative. And for those of you who are in the HR field, keep in mind that you did earn one recertification credit on your SHRM certification. You'll receive a certification certificate via email following this presentation. We've also applied for HRCI credit, and once approved, you'll also receive your certificate for 1 hour of HRCI credit. Thank you.